So our second session, we have Danielle Strachman, who is the founder and managing director of 1517 Fund. It's a great fund that funds hackers and non-traditional founders. I'll let her talk a little bit about the fund. And what's the origin of the name?
Sure. Yeah. Great question. The name is kind of a fun one. I can't take credit for it. It's my colleague's fault. He loves history, and to actually back up before I tell the name. So our fund focuses on working with people who are really outside sort of a traditional educational track, and so we work predominantly with people who have either stopped out or dropped out of college, or people who have never gone to college. I'd say 85% of our founders don't have an undergrad degree. And one of the things that one of our missions with the fund, outside of bringing in returns for our investors, is to prove out that one path is not for all in terms of education, and that a young person shouldn't be considered necessarily on the wrong path if they're not doing what everybody else is doing. And in fact, sometimes exiting that path, and I actually think, I'm sort of like going on the fly here, but I think exiting is a lesson that young women are often not taught. We are not taught to exit systems that are abusive and bad for us.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that education is inherently that, but I think it's really important to learn to exit a system. And so part of our mission is to make it possible for young people to exit a system and it to be socially acceptable to do so. And that's really important. And so to go to the name, which is all my colleagues' fault, but I love it. He noticed a couple things. One, that numbers are kind of hypnotic. He has a sweatshirt that has a mathematical, like a famous mathematical number on it. And people would always stop him and be like, what's your sweatshirt mean? And just strangers, I mean, people randomly would ask him. So he's like, interesting. Numbers have this hypnotic quality. No one stops me when I wear a t-shirt that says, Teal Fellowship, which is, where we came out of, or any number of things that you might, have on your garb. But we noticed this about numbers. And then he loves history. And one day when we were at the Teal Foundation still in year 5 in 2015, we had this idea to start a venture fund and really repackage the Teal Fellowship as like a 2.0 version to work with people's companies. And we needed a name and we were thinking about it. And I walk into the office one day and he's scribbling 1517 all over this piece of paper, kind of like possessed. Like he's just, oh, there's my cat. You guys get to meet my cat? That's Little. She's amazing. She knows 6 tricks. Maybe you can see one later. Yeah, she'll hang out. It's cool.
That's our special guest.
It's our special guest. Yeah, she's pretty special. But so he was scratching this number on this piece of paper, and I was like, yeah, what's up with you today, dude? Like writing 1517 all over this piece of paper. And he said, oh, this is the year of the Protestant Reformation, 1517. And I kind of looked at him and I said, I must have missed that part of history class. Tell me a little more. And then he said, oh, Martin Luther nailing the theses. And I was like, keep going. And he said, oh, well, yeah, Martin Luther was protesting the sale of a piece of paper called an indulgence that you buy from the church to gain access to the kingdom of heaven. And he nailed the theses to the door and of the church and said, essentially, this is wrong that the church does this. And we have a parallel to this where we think it's wrong for another institution called higher education to sell a very expensive piece of paper to young people, making them go into debt for it even, and saying, hey, to be called an educated person, you need one of these pieces of paper called a diploma. So our sort of tagline on that, it was bullshit then and it's bullshit now.
I love this.
Yeah, the first time we pitched this, so I guess this is another kind of lesson for people, is that like everything starts way smaller than you think. So we started our venture fund with this idea. I mean, we had this track record of working at the Teal Fellowship with Peter and with all these different Teal Fellows and seeing a lot of successes come out of it. But when we started to launch 1517, we wanted to experiment and try things out. Like we needed to know, does this name work? Like, is there a resonance here? So Michael actually went to a hackathon. It was LA Hacks back in 2015. We got 2 shirts. We ordered them off of Zazzle, of all places, and had the 1517 across the chest. We pretended to go as 1517, even though 1517 didn't exist. We didn't have a website, nothing registered. We were supposed to be going as the Teal Foundation, paid on the Teal Foundation's dime to be there. And Michael got up on stage and pitched this whole Martin Luther thesis and said at the end, it was bullshit then, it was bullshit now. And the crowd went insane. Like people
That's awesome.
wild. People started tweeting about it and all this stuff. And we hadn't ever gotten that kind of response out of the Teal Fellowship, in part because I think the fellowship is very elite and like we only select this many people. So it's harder for people to resonate with the mission. But with 1517, immediately, like that same day, this young woman tweeted at Michael and said, you know, hey bro, I'm part of the movement. And I was like, that is perfect. Like,
Yeah.
you know, and like we consider ourselves both a venture fund and a movement of what we're doing. And so that's where our name comes from.
That's awesome. I
Yeah.
love the story. I love the name. And it's so easy to remember, you know. If I can't remember the number, I'll just Google
Well,
Protestant.
the other way that people sometimes think about it is they'll say, oh, do you work with 15 to 17-year-olds? And we do sometimes work with 15 to 17-year-olds. But that's not, you know, we don't have an age cutoff in our fund. It's really about that narrative of taking an alternative path.
That's awesome. And I've looked through some of your portfolio companies, and the founders really are extremely creative thinkers.
Okay.
They are what you think of as, you know, hackers and doers.
Yep.
So speaking of hackers and doers, I know 1517 has actually two podcast series interviewing founders and also sort of non-traditional frames of thinking.
Yeah.
And so I did some digging on you, Danielle, and you've actually done some extraordinary stuff with seasteading and not just creating and designing the Teal Fellowship. So I wanted to interview you as, you know, the hacker that is always interviewing other people, but really I'd love to know your story as well.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. I grew up in a family of makers and entrepreneurial types, and my parents are both small business owners. You know, my mom is a massage therapist. She used to be a general contractor. My dad owns his own shop. He's a mechanic of foreign motors and things like that. And so I grew up with this mentality of that you make your own money and you create your own path. And so I think a lot of the lessons that I learned about like making and sort of like hacking my way into things was really by example of my parents, of being able to see that just like by osmosis how they did it. And there's actually a book that I read when I was in my early 20s that was really a game changer for me. It's called Zen and the Art of Making a Living. And it's all about this, it's a book and a workbook. And I like did the workbook portions asking you all these questions. And one of the things in the workbook that has always stood out to me is there's this section that's all about, hey, if there's a thing that you want to do, but you have to have a credential to do it, can you think about other avenues to do the thing you want to do, but without the credential piece? And so one of the things I was experimenting with at the time was that I loved education, but I had always shied away from it. You know, there's all kinds of terrible adages like those who can't teach and things like that. And, you know, everyone knows that being a teacher is really hard and low pay and all this stuff. And so I had been very much turned off of that path. But I was reading this book when I was about 22. I was going to go to grad school actually for neuropsych, and I realized I didn't love it with every fiber of my being. I liked it, but I didn't love it. And it was certainly interesting to me, but yeah, I didn't want to go down that academic path. I also didn't want to spend another $30,000 a year, you know, getting my PsyD or something like that. And I read this book, and it made me think like, well, maybe I don't need to go back to school to become a teacher or like a proper educator, but maybe I could start a tutoring company. And because the title of tutor is not a credentialed name, I can just use that, or I can call myself an educational facilitator, or, you know, I can just be the director of heightened learning, or like that was my company's name. And that attitude of, oh, I get to give myself the title that I want to give myself has been true for my entire career. So I started my tutoring company. I worked with all kinds of different students who were in public school, private school, homeschoolers, which I'm sort of trying to make certain long stories a little shorter, but that led me into starting a charter school with a friend of mine. And it's the same thing there where, you know, I can't be a principal because I don't have a principal credential, but I can be the director of my school. And in fact, actually, this was funny. Yesterday, I met up with an old student of mine. She was a sixth grader at our charter school when it first opened in 2008. I was like a very funky school principal. I had dyed hair and just all kinds of weird stuff. And it was really fun to be very self-expressed. Like part of our mission statement at the school is self-expression for students and staff. And actually yesterday, like fast forwarding this story a little bit, this student is helping out and volunteering with a lot of the protests in terms of helping out being a medic at a lot of the protests that are happening in Oakland, and
That's
she needed
awesome.
she needed some GoPros, and I was like, I can get you GoPros. So I collected a bunch of GoPros. My roommate helped collect GoPros, and I brought them to her, and she's in her like early to mid 20s now. And it was really cool to connect with her again. And I was talking to her boyfriend, and he's like, how do you guys know each other? And I was like, I was her school principal. Like, is that funny? And now we're hanging out in Oakland. But again, it's this story of like, you don't have to like go down this path that is credentialed to do something. And that led me into actually moving up to the Bay Area. I had a old partner at the time who lived up here. I was in San Diego, and I had been running my school for 2 years. The school still exists. It's called Innovations Academy. We're buying a building this year. We serve 400
Oh,
students a
congrats.
year. Yeah, no, we were super excited about it. It's actually kind of funny timing because with COVID, we were supposed to move the school with the students in the middle of the year. But because COVID hit, all our students are learning from home. And we got to move the school without having to move the students with it. So it
Oh,
kind of
that's
worked out
great.
in this weird perfect way. I was like, oh, okay, that kind of worked out. You know, I mean, we certainly don't like the effects of COVID, but from a moving standpoint, it was helpful. But I moved up to the Bay Area. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do when I moved up here. And actually, I was nervous because like the Bay is known as this hacker culture. But at the time, and I still don't really consider myself like a hacker. Like I
You
still think of
definitely are.
as I know we totally are. And there's probably lots of discussion we could have about like what is a hacker, and you know, are there gendered things around hacking and like all this kind of thing. But I didn't consider myself a hacker at the time in any way. And so I moved up here, and I was scared because I was like, I don't code. I didn't study like a hard STEM field, like a super hard one. Like, you know, I wasn't like in like chemistry or physics, or it's like, okay, psych is like on the line. And so I had all this like bias against myself of like, how could I be a valuable contributor in this ecosystem? And I knew people at seasteading, and I've been philosophically in line with what seasteading does for a long time. And I actually helped them to throw an event between seasteading and the Teal Foundation, which is how I started getting to know people at the Teal Foundation. And then I got pulled into the Teal Fellowship because they were just starting to launch that program. And the woman that I was working on the collaborative project between seasteading and the Teal Foundation called me, and her exact words were, the foundation has lost their minds. They're like, oh, they're launching this program and they don't have anybody running it. And I had never seen something like that before. I was like, who starts a program and like doesn't have a pilot and a team and like, oh, okay, Peter does this. Having been an operator of a charter school, I'm used to like lots of structure, and you have to do this and do that. And I loved coming on board and building that program from scratch with our team, and building it with the first class of Teal Fellows. It was a very collaborative environment. And so, yeah, that like sort of maker hacker mindset is part of me. And in terms of the venture fund now, I get to call myself an investor because I invest people's money. Like, I don't need a credential to do that. It did take me probably a good 2 years to feel comfortable using that title, in part because there's a lot of personality gunk, if you will, in the
Yeah.
investment community, and I didn't want to be associated with that. So I would often, like, you know, if I, you know, got in a ride share or something, people were like, oh, what do you do? And I was like, oh, I work with startups. Like, I didn't want to call myself an investor.
I do the same thing.
Yeah, and like it depends. I'll sort of I'll think about what frame I want for my title, but actually at this point I've been doing it for 5 years, and if I'm in a group that is comfortable, like I'll just tell people, yeah, I'm a startup investor. Like, this is, you know, I run my own venture fund and this is what I do. But I think there's an interesting lesson here in terms of there are lots of ways to do the things that you want in your career and in your future, and it doesn't have to look like doing the one thing that will get you the credentialed thing. Like I can't be like a financial advisor, because I don't have a credential for that, but I can be an investor because, you know, when you found your own things, you tend to get to give yourself titles.
I totally agree with that. I think so many of us are sort of tracked down the one path, and
Yeah.
you know, so here are the steps, here are the hurdles that you have to jump over.
Yeah.
Just learn how to jump over them.
Yeah.
Whereas
Well,
we're not allowed to look outside of it.
yeah, and I think I was talking to a woman the other day about this, where I was saying that I know, like, for example, when I did go to college and I enjoyed it, and I paid almost zero, like I had scholarships and stuff, like, so I didn't come out with a huge saddling of debt, which is why I was able to start my first tutoring company and not have to just race out there and go get like a full-time job and things like that. So I was really thankful for that experience. But I remember at the time, I remember being 18 and getting into some of the schools that I wanted to go to. And my mom's like, oh, you're going to go to the school, right? And it sort of made me pause for a second. I was like, I don't know. Now at the time, like, you know, laptops didn't exist. Like there was no way to like start a startup quickly. I didn't have an idea of what else I would do. So school was a good place for me to incubate. But I remember my mom telling me, women fought for you to have this option. So
Yeah.
you have to take it. And I only like many years later, probably like 10 years later, I was like, women fought for me to have the option.
Yeah.
Women didn't fight for me so that people would tell me what to do. Like they fought so that I could do it or not do it. And I think that's something that is hard. Like I even remember when I started my charter school, people in my family were like, why don't you go back and get your master's or your PhD in education? And like, I think people thought I was kind of vain saying this, and maybe I am, but I would tell people I just wrote a 400-page document to put out to San Diego Unified School District to get approved to start a school. I'm waiting for my honorary degree to come to me because I've done the work of a dissertation. I just didn't enroll in the program. And it was hard because I think people thought, like in my family, I was probably going to be the first one to get my PhD, like out of aunts and uncles and all kinds of stuff. And I was like, nope, not doing it. And I never want to do it. Like I'm still waiting for my honorary degree.
I do wonder how much of that is bragging rights by family members, you know, or
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, or like expectations and things like that. Like especially like with my parents, like you know, being sort of like my parents are very smart, like, but they're not academics. Like, so they were excited to have someone in the family like go down that path that was like different for our family, I think. And I just didn't want to do it. I
Yeah.
didn't want to come out of school at almost 30 years old, never having had a real job. I was like, that's ridiculous. Like, because like a PhD program takes, you know, people are like, oh, it's like 4 years. I'm like, no, it's not. It's like 7 at a
Yep.
minimum. And that's not including the like quarter life crisis people go through and the mental health things people face, and they stop and start and go. Like I've had a lot of friends go down that path and even stop the year before they're done to go work at Google. And I'm like, all right, well, that's not for me.
I worked for 2 years at UCSF. There was definitely a postdoc there that was, you know, well, no, this was still a PhD student. It was his 8th year. And
Yeah. And that's totally normal. Like that is totally, utterly normal. And I was like, wow, I don't. And what was great about starting my tutoring company is I loved working with students who had anxiety and depression and other sort of clinically minded things. So I could use the background that I had gotten working in a neuropsych institute and that sort of like very people-oriented, psychologically interested part of my brain with students. And I could do it when I was 22 instead of having to wait until I was like 28 plus to actually start working with people. And I loved being able to dig in, and application is really important to me. So as I was applying things to students, of course, I'm going out and reading more books and, you know, upping my game. And, but keeping things within theory is like, I like learning new things, but application for me is just where I get really excited.
I do think that a large part of the reason why society wants you to have a degree is that it's easier to evaluate people, right? Is that if you don't have the time,
Yeah, no, it's totally an assessment. Like an assessment's really hard.
it's
Like
a shortcut.
yeah, it's a total shortcut for assessment. And I get it because assessment is really tough.
But are you assessing the right skills?
Right, exactly. Yeah. I've talked to many people too as well who are like, oh wow, we had an internship program and we hired people from community college and from Ivy Leagues. And what we saw is that the people, you know, from community college were like hungrier for the opportunity and were like really in it. And it's not to knock on people on the other side of this, but it's just, you just can't assume. I mean, we saw that in the Teal Fellowship too. We had people who had never gone to college at all or never even applied. We had one person who was in community college. We had a high schooler. We had people who were in Ivies. It was like across the board. And one thing we learned was that people who did really well on like science fairs and tests like that, they were really good at winning prizes and
Yep.
really good at working in a box. But then we were like, guess what? The world's your oyster. You can make anything you want. And they were like, whoa, I don't know how to win this game.
Exactly.
And it's a totally different skill set. So we really pivoted to moving away from looking at AP exams and what science fair did you win to what are you building? What do you
Yep.
make? Like, let's just get down to brass tacks.
Yep. I'll throw myself under the bus with this example. So I did have a 4.0 from an Ivy League college, but so Google actually used to hire for those when they first started. And
Yeah.
what they found is that their highest performing employees are not those. So they
Yep.
stopped looking for GPA as one of the requirements. So I totally
Yep.
agree with you. It's,
Yep.
it's just looking at real data rather than a proxy of
Yep.
what you're looking for.
Yep. No, absolutely. I do have a funny like mini Google story. Like I know they do some interesting sort of like team building activities when people get there. And I know a woman who worked there for a short time where they had them do one of those like team building, but it's really sort of like an IQ test at the same time things where it's like you get a box of spaghetti and some magnets and you're going to build the biggest spaghetti tower with your team with these materials we give you. And she went to the sort of the proctor, if you will, of this exam and was like, so these are the rules, right? And they were like, yeah, those are the rules. So you have to follow within these guidelines. And she said, okay, great. And she had, I guess they had tables that were kind of like this is a folding table over here. She took the table and she put it up on end, and then she built her tower on top of that. And so her team's tower was way bigger. And they were like, no, you can't do that. She was like, it doesn't say this in the rules. Like, so she was more divergent of a thinker than what she was looking for. What she noticed was everybody who was on that team or anyone who sort of like was so divergent that they were outside the box lasted about 2 years there and then had to go.
Really?
Even within the Google X team, like a lot of them made it into the X team and then were like, it was still.
Wow. I'm surprised to hear that about the X team because the X team is the divergent team.
I know. Like, and this is an N of one. Like, I only have a little story. So, like, maybe she's a super outlier in her particular team, but she said that she's observed this a lot of like that Google is still looking for like within a certain box.
I think it's almost unavoidable when you're working for a large corporate is that there, for an entire team to function, there has to be rules.
Yep.
So switching topics a little bit, I saw recently one of your tweets got a lot of hearts, a lot of retweets, and it was you were coaching a high school science contest, or
yeah, that one, yeah. That's oh man, yeah, this happened like 2 weeks ago. I was coaching a team. The organization is called Quarter Zero. They are really wonderful. If any high schoolers are listening, look into it. It's an entrepreneurship program. I love volunteering with them. They're really great. And I was doing mentor office hours over Zoom, and this pair of founders were pitching their idea to me, and I'm always looking for these, like the teacher in me is always looking for like the learning opportunity and the time to be like, hold on, pause, we're going to do this thing different. And I noticed at one point the team had sort of pitched kind of what they were doing. Their high school team, so they're not used to pitching, they're asking questions. And I noticed that the young man, it was a male-female team, and I noticed that the young man was kind of like taking most of the answers and not in like a aggressive way. Like he was just kind of like answering things. And so at one point I asked the young woman, I was like, hey, like, what do you think about such and such? Or I think I said something like, it's not clear to me what your product is. I'd really love to hear it from you. And she got super flustered and she's like, and she's like looking all over and she started like, even her breathing started getting fast. And she's like, this is really hard. This is really hard. And I was like, it's okay. This can be really hard. And she tried to pass it back to her co-founder. She's like, oh, he can just answer it. And I was like, nope, like, that's not what we're doing. I would like you to take a deep breath. And I want you to think for a minute and just I want you to tell me what you think. And her co-founder was great. He just like, he stepped down. He was like, cool. Like, and he was even smiling. Like I could tell he was like, oh, good. Like I want her to talk. And, he was also a high schooler, so he doesn't know how to coach her about this. And she gave this answer that was clarifying what the product was. And I was like, that was really great. Okay, here's another question I want you to answer. And I sort of coached them through that, you have to take turns back and forth, and especially over Zoom, you have to pass the baton on who's talking. And at one point I said to her, because she was really nervous in every answer she gave me, and I said, what do you really love? And she's like, oh, I really love my dogs. And I was like, okay, cool. Tell me about your dogs. And she just started going on and on and on. No nervousness, no nothing, just talking about her dogs. And I was like, okay, here's what you've got to get. Your project is your dog. I was like, nobody knows more about your project than you do. I know you're nervous and it's hard to speak about something that maybe you feel like you should have more expertise, but it's your project. No one knows more than you do about your project. So you got to talk about your project like you talk about your dogs. And she was sort of like nodding her head, and it was really uncomfortable. She was really super uncomfortable. And I turned to the co-founder too, and I said to him, like, you can't be the talker. I was like, I hate teams where it's like the lead singer and the backup dancers, like,
Yep.
hate it. So don't do that. And he was like, okay, cool. So it was this really great sort of teachable moment, and I hope it sunk in for the longer haul than those 5 minutes. But that's really important to me. Or like when I'm working with groups and we're talking, and it's predominantly men who are raising their hands, I'll just like pause and I'm like, next question I'm taking is from a woman, and I will just call on you. Like, I used to be a principal. I have no problem just calling on you. And
I
people
love
get
that.
really flustered, and I'm like, okay, cool, great. Guess what? You in the red, you're up. And it really starts early and young. And I don't think it's just like a boys are dominating issue. I also think it's that young women have gotten into patterns too of deferring to other people.
Yep.
One part of my education that I think was helpful for me is that I did go to an all women's college. And so there weren't any guys to like compete with. And so the only people who were going to be raising their hands were us. And so I think I got very used to that. And I don't even think at the time I wasn't thinking of like, oh, I'm excited to go to an all women's college. Like, I didn't pick it for that. But I found it helpful later in life to have been in that kind of environment. But I think it's really important for teachers and facilitators, and anyone who's working with students to like really create that environment and have like zero tolerance for things just staying as they are, whether it's about gender or race or sexual orientation or anything. Like, we should hear from all kinds of voices. And I think it's okay for people who are used to letting their voices be quiet to feel uncomfortable about that and practice it anyways.
So I actually think 1517 is perfect for you because, I mean, you of all people are so good at coaching that, especially for the younger founders that haven't gone through the traditional education route, you're just perfect for the fund.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely still guilty of sort of shutting myself up, right? So for some of us that are not lucky enough to have you as a coach or have you as a portfolio manager, how do we edit ourselves or catch ourselves in those moments of deference?
I think there's a couple of things. Like, I think especially for women in particular, there's a lot of research to talk about that women are really good at going to bat for a bigger cause or for other people.
Yeah.
And so if you can think of yourself as like, if you're in a room and you're like, no women are speaking or whatever, you can think of yourself as like, hey, you know what? I have the opportunity to set a really great example right now and model something. Okay, I'm gonna like speak up about something, like, especially as adult women, I think we can sort of take that on. So I think that's a helpful framework sometimes, instead of just being like, oh, no one wants to hear from me. It's like, no, I have things to say. And in speaking, I'm getting to access some power that maybe other people will see and know that they can access too. So that's one way of maybe thinking about it. I think for people who are specifically working with people, maybe not even just young people, is like being aware and being willing to actually, like, in the name of progress, say, hey, you know what? I know this is really uncomfortable, but I'm going to stop our QA session right now because I noticed that so far the only people that I've gotten questions are from men. So I'd really like to hear from some women now. Like, and just put it out there. Like, and it's super uncomfortable, but like, I think like we are in the privileged position to be able to sit with that discomfort and take it on.
Yeah. And I think if we don't call it out, the status quo just stays.
Yeah, no, it keeps going. And I noticed sometimes, like, I was on a call with, it was me and one other woman on a Zoom of like, it had to be at least like 20, 25 people or something like that. And I noticed like there was like that sort of pattern happening of like, oh, like the guys are kind of dominating, we're being quiet, like, and I was like, okay, like I was actually privately chatting with her in the chat box and was like, yo, we need to speak up, like it has to happen.
Yeah.
And I got her like on my team for it, and then like we started speaking up more because like we had each other's back in the Zoom chat. So
that's awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think it's just purely gender, because I've definitely seen, you know, it's just, I think it's a personality thing. I do think that women are probably conditioned to be more deferential, but this can happen across genders as well.
And it's about practice. I used to be super shy. Like I used to hide behind my mom and be super shy and not ask questions in class. But then I one lesson that I always put out, especially to young people, is like do things that are outside your comfort zone. So for me, what was outside my comfort zone was I joined a speech and debate group.
Wow.
And like when you get up, I will never forget like getting up and debating this one topic that I knew nothing about, but I had to get up and kind of like bullshit this topic for 7 minutes, and I did, and I won. And I was like, I won on a technicality, and I was like, all right, cool, that's amazing. And I was like, if I can get up and bullshit for 7 minutes about something I know nothing about and still win on a technicality, like I felt I was over the moon about it. And it was like taking the steps to do that. Or I helped a friend political campaign when I was 18 years old, and I walked door to door, knocking on people's doors, asking them to sign a petition. That was way outside my comfort zone. For other people, their comfort zone is zipping it. Yeah. Like, and so comfort zone isn't just like, oh, like do the extroverted thing. For some of us, it's that, but for some of us, it's like, hey, like take time to like give space to other people or facilitate other people's voices coming out. So I'm a big fan of people looking at like where's their comfort zone bubble and like kind of pushing on it.
So for you're very self-aware, so you're very good at gauging where is that like your area of improvement and going there. I don't think a lot of people are that self-aware. So what's your advice on actually seeing where your own weaknesses are?
Yeah, I guess there's a couple things. Like one thing that has been a good barometer for me in this is that I look for where I'm both nervous and excited at the same time. I don't like the type of risk where I just feel nervous about it. Like that to me seems a little bit more like I'm just doing something to like get over it or get through it, in a way that doesn't feel as growth promoting for me. Like, but if I notice like a twinge of excitement about it and the nervousness, that's when I'm like, okay, this is the thing I should go for. I can give you a brief example of this that's recent.
Yes, please.
I decided so I just turned 40, and
you look great.
Thank you. Yes, I do. No. But that was fun. I'm like noticing embarrassment. I'm like, oh, I'm flushing now. Okay. Anyways, so I just turned 40, and I decided for my birthday, I love pushing these type of boundary things and have been aware of them for a long time. But one of the things that I thought about was that it would be really fun to do trapeze. And I have a fear of heights. I don't like fast moving things. I'm not like a amusement park roller coaster person. For a long time, especially as a kid and through teenage years, I thought of myself as very clumsy and things like that. I don't think of myself that way anymore, but like there was this sort of like confluence of fear that would go into this trapeze thing. And so I got a group of friends together. I think it was about like 15 of us to do this. And the guy who was running the thing was like, okay, it's your birthday, you're going first. And I was like, oh no. And I got up on the trapeze, and they make you like do the whole thing during this workshop that they run. And I stood at the top, and I'm like looking down, and I'm pretty terrified. And I was holding onto the bar, and I really like scaffolding my skills. And so I was really hoping the first thing would just be just like, okay, just hang and sort of like fly out. Of course, he wanted me to like lift my legs and do all this stuff. All I did was hold onto the bar and yell, no. It was so scary, and it was so much faster than I anticipated. I was like, I could feel my stomach drop. It was terrible. But by my 5th time doing it, I like did the flip and got all the stuff. But it was that excited, nervous thing. Like it was both. Like I don't know that I would want to do it again. It wasn't something where after the fact I was just like, oh wow, that was so awesome. I'm so glad I did it that I'd want to do it again. But it was good to do it in the moment. So that's what I kind of look for internally, is that like excited plus nervousness at the same time.
I think you might be better than most of us because most of us don't have the same level of editing that you do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think some of the people that I've met that speak a lot during calls and whatnot, I don't know if they have the same level of self-awareness to realize the nervousness.
Yeah, it's taken a long time to cultivate this. This did not come naturally. Like
Yeah.
I mean, some of it is about having been an East Coaster, moving to California, and that being a big leap in and of itself. And yeah, so it's, I don't think I was like born this way. So like these types of reflective skills can definitely be learned and cultivated. And the first step is just paying attention.
I want to end the call on, what's your best advice for founders?
Best advice for founders. I would say like, yeah, like one of my sort of mantras is like, just keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
Like 1517 started with a t-shirt. And that's how we started building the fund. Or like my charter school that I started, it started with a conversation with my friend who wanted to start this school with me. And then we took the next step, which was like to do a 2-page write-up about something. And then we went to a conference about charter schools. Like we just kept taking one step at a time. It was the same thing for the Teal Fellowship also, of like, okay, like we're gonna have this application cycle and we're gonna build out like what we need when we need it. I think too often founders see like the big picture story of like, and this is me and I'm awesome and I built this huge thing and it all worked, and it's like really hard to understand how it all came together. So I would just say, keep taking those like small steps. Many times I'll work with people who they have a really big vision for what they want to do, and I'll be like, that's amazing, what are you gonna do on Friday?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, like let's back this way up of like, if you want to get to Mars, like how do we back this up to what you do on Friday? And so that, yeah, I think that would be some of my main advice to founders, is just like trying to find like what's the next action that you can take.
Yep. I've for some founders, I've given them homework before. Here are the 3 things you're going to do next week, and then we update the things every week, and that's been helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Totally agree.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well,
Well,
this has been super fun.
Likewise. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if anybody wants to reach out, I'm just Danielle at 1517fund.com. Find me on Twitter, find me on email. It's
And
all good.
and her tweets are awesome.
Tweeting is my like vent place. I definitely use the different social platforms for different things. So yeah, Twitter is my like, I'm gonna vent and be frustrated about stuff. So
she has a great sense of humor.
I'm like a nice person. I'm not just venting all the time.
I definitely agree. She's an awesome person.
Well, thank you. I feel the same.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Gwen.
Bye.
Bye.